Rolleiflex T. Is this the best everyday carry TLR out there? That's for you to decide. I really like the camera, but I do have to admit I've hardly ever met a Rolleiflex I didn't like. We'll talk about some of the things I like about this camera, show you some pictures, but more importantly, I have to mention James Bond used one. That's as good a recommendation as you can get. This camera came out as a less expensive version of the Rolleiflex. It is a Rolleiflex, and in the tradition of the new standard that had levers instead of the wheels, which reduced the cost as direct connection to the shutter instead of the geared controls, simpler film advance, a simplified shutter linkage, which I quite like. The shutter release is here from the side instead of from the front. I find both work fine for me. I often hold it this way. It's very steady, if I am. This was the first 2 1/4 Rolleiflex that offered a removable hood. And that lets you also change the screens if you want a brighter screen. I quite like the screens that came in these. They focus really nice, and to me they're plenty bright, and they have a built-in Fresnel pattern that makes illumination even across the screen because the corners aren't dark like the old glass screens up to the MX EVS 3.5B. This also allows you to put on the prism, which I like a lot. I used to use this most of the time. I liked eye-level viewing, and it also enables you to turn the camera over and you get the taking lens a little higher, kind of like front rise on a view camera for keeping buildings from look like they're leaning back. But I've been using the waist level finder exclusively for a while now. It forces me to see things from a different perspective, and I really like the ground glass view. It's like looking at a little miniature picture there. Like all of the f3.5 Rolleiflexes from the late 30s to this point, this has the bayonet 1 for the lens caps and the lens hoods and the filters. And that's great because these are a lot less expensive than the larger size filters for the later planar and Zenitar lensed cameras. You can even get things like aftermarket filters because this was a common size with the Japanese TLRs. It's really widely made. And you have available the very nice Rollenar Rollapar system that incorporates a prism in the viewing lens so that it's parallax corrected even as you get close. There's 3 levels of these, and you get quite close with the number 3. I like to have the number 1 with me. I don't use it often, but it's a handy thing to have when you just want to get a little bit closer. The Rolleiflex T incorporated all the improvements up until this point in time, the large focus knob, which also took an uncoupled meter as an option. I prefer it this way. If you want a meter, I would just carry a separate meter. It had a simplified loading system that dispensed with the Automat's double roller here that you had to feed the leader through and then sensed when the film came through. I just feel like that's an extra complication and slows down the loading, if anything. With this, you just wind on until the arrow meets this red dot, close the back, and wind on. You're ready to go. All these were in an effort to make a simpler camera that could reduce the cost, and it proved to be very popular. It was one of Rollei's most popular cameras, if not the most popular, with professionals and amateurs alike. One reason for that was it had a great lens. This Carl Zeiss Tessar is a recalculated version using more modern glass, and I think it's a substantial improvement over the older lenses. Not that there was anything wrong with them. They were great lenses. A lot of the world's greatest pictures were taken with those old Xenars and Tessars. but this one is a step up. You never feel like you're giving anything up to the planar or Zenitar versions. Those are great lenses. They're better lenses objectively, but this does everything I could want it to do. Well, this camera does have the much discussed, interesting choice of words, EV system that interlocks the aperture and shutter speed. So when you move the lever, you do all your exposure adjustments with this left-hand lever. It moves both the shutter and the aperture to give you the same equivalent exposure value. If you want to change the actual exposure, you can find a shutter speed you want and pull this lever out and change the aperture independently. I kind of like this one. I never was a big fan of the EV systems, but this does have an advantage to me over most of the Rolleiflexes with the little wheels for changing the aperture and shutter speed. I, for some reason, have trouble with the aperture knob getting bumped, changing my exposure, never for the better. This never gets bumped, and if it does, it doesn't change your exposure. If there's a downside to this camera, it's price. They seem to be coming down significantly now, and I've been able to find them at reasonable prices. I bought this one a few years ago on eBay for, I don't remember, but very realistic price. What happened, I think, was when the Vivian Maier sensation hit, they found a Rolleiflex, a gray Rolleiflex T in her possessions. And that was exhibited with her photo shows, and it came to be the camera associated with Vivian Maier, even though it seems likely it was not. It was one of her least used cameras. It doesn't show up in her selfies that I've seen. One that might possibly be a Rolleiflex T. Nonetheless, that had the effect of driving the prices up, and they were, I felt, ridiculously high for quite a long time. Sometimes as much as a 3.5f, and that doesn't make sense to me. It's a very nice camera, and what you pay for, it's up to you. But if you can find a good condition copy of the Rolleiflex T at a price you like, I highly recommend the camera. It's light, it's bright, it's sharp, it handles nice. I've found them to be very reliable. It's a nice all-around camera. And last but not least, I really like how that hood works. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this.